What if the aliens we imagine are nothing like what's actually out there? We often picture little green men, or even super advanced beings with technology we can barely dream of. But what if their intelligence, their very existence, is so utterly different from ours that we couldn't even begin to grasp it? This is the story of Kelvin Taylor, a man living in a forgotten corner of Texas who encountered something that defied every assumption humanity has ever made about extraterrestrial life. And what this being whispered to him about the nature of reality itself didn't just challenge his beliefs, it obliterated them. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear will make you question whether anything you perceive as real actually exists at all. Now, let's go back to the night Kelvin's understanding of existence collapsed. The town didn't have a name that mattered. Officially, it was called Redemption, Texas, population 847, though that number had been painted on the welcome sign in 1993, and nobody had bothered updating it since. People didn't move to Redemption. They got stuck there, born into families that had been there for generations, working the same failing ranches, drinking at the same 2 bars, dying in the same small cemetery on the edge of town, where the graves dated back to when this place actually meant something. Kelvin Taylor had been stuck there for 31 years. Not because he lacked ambition. He'd had plenty of that once. Scholarship to study astrophysics at Rice University, full ride, his ticket out of the dust and the heat and the suffocating sameness of small-town Texas. But his father had gotten sick the summer before he was supposed to leave. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 6 months if he was lucky. And Kelvin's mother had looked at him with eyes that didn't need to speak, that carried the weight of 3 generations of Taylor men who'd worked the land, who'd stayed, who'd sacrificed. So he'd stayed. Deferred the scholarship for a year. Then his father died, and his mother fell apart, and the year became 2 years, then 5, then a decade. The scholarship evaporated. The dreams calcified into something hard and bitter that Kelvin kept locked in a place he tried not to visit. He worked at the only place in town that paid decent money, a radio telescope facility about 15 miles outside Redemption, part of a larger array that stretched across West Texas, listening to the cosmos for signals that never came. It was grunt work mostly. Maintenance. Calibration. Making sure the equipment didn't overheat in the brutal summer Sunday. But Kelvin didn't mind. At least he was close to the stars, even if he'd never study them the way he'd planned. At least he was listening to the universe, even if the universe never seemed to have anything to say. His shift ended at midnight. The drive back to town took 23 minutes on a straight highway that cut through nothing but darkness and scrubland, the kind of road where you could fall asleep at the wheel and not hit anything for miles. Kelvin had the radio on, tuned to a station out of El Paso that played old country, the kind his father had loved. Waylon Jennings was singing about Lonesome and Blue when the static hit. Not gradually. All at once. The music cut out, replaced by a wall of white noise so loud Kelvin flinched and reached for the volume knob. But before he could turn it down, the static changed. It developed texture. Rhythm. Almost like language, but not quite. Like someone trying to speak through interference, through distance, through something that wasn't quite compatible with human communication. Kelvin's hand froze on the knob. He'd spent 10 years listening to cosmic noise, learning to distinguish between natural radio emissions and human-made interference, between random fluctuations and patterns that suggested intelligence. This was a pattern. Complex. Deliberate. Structured. And it was coming through his truck's FM radio, which made absolutely no sense. The facility's equipment was designed to detect signals from light years away, frequencies far beyond what a standard radio could pick up. But this was here. Local. Close. Kelvin pulled over, the truck's tires crunching on gravel, and he sat there in the darkness with the engine idling and the static washing over him. And then, beneath the noise, he heard it. A voice. Not speaking English. Not speaking any language he recognized. But somehow, impossibly, he understood it. Not the words. The meaning. You are listening. Finally, one of you is listening. Kelvin's heart hammered against his ribs. Who is this? He said aloud, feeling ridiculous talking to his radio. The static shifted, and the voice came again, clearer now. Not who. What. And you do not have concepts for what I am. But you are listening, and that is enough. Drive forward. 3.7 miles. There is a place where the barrier is thin. I will meet you there. This isn't real, Kelvin said, his voice shaking. I'm hallucinating. Heat stroke. Exhaustion. You are not hallucinating, Kelvin Taylor. You are perceiving. For the first time in your existence, you are perceiving beyond the narrow bandwidth your species mistakes for reality. Drive forward. I have been waiting for someone like you. The static cut out. The radio went dead. Not just silent, completely dead, the display dark, as if the power had been cut. Kelvin sat there for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his mind racing through rational explanations. Equipment malfunction. Some kind of prank from the guys at the facility. A seizure, maybe, some neurological event that was making him hear things. But the voice knew his name, and it had felt real in a way that transcended the usual markers of reality. Not real, like touching something solid. Real, like remembering something true. Kelvin put the truck in drive and moved forward. He told himself he was just continuing home, that he wasn't actually following instructions from a voice in the static, but he counted the miles on the odometer anyway. 3.7 miles from where he'd pulled over, there was nothing. Just more highway, more darkness, more empty Texas scrubland. But something made him slow down. Some instinct he didn't have words for. And that's when he saw it. Off to the right, maybe 100 yards from the road, there was a light. Not bright. Not obvious. Just a faint luminescence, like foxfire or swamp gas, hovering about 3 feet off the ground. Kelvin pulled over again and killed the engine. The silence was absolute. No wind. No insects. No distant traffic. Just silence, so complete it felt like pressure against his eardrums. He got out of the truck, and the heat hit him immediately. Texas in August, even at night, was like standing in front of an open oven. But as he walked toward the light, the temperature changed. Dropped. Not gradually, but in distinct zones, as if he was passing through invisible barriers. 90 degrees. Then 70. Then 50. By the time he was within 20 feet of the light, he could see his breath. The light pulsed, and Kelvin stopped walking. Because the light was changing, shifting, coalescing into something that had shape but no solidity, form but no substance. It looked almost human. Almost. The proportions were wrong in ways that made Kelvin's eyes hurt to track. Limbs that seemed to exist in more dimensions than 3. A head that was both there and not there, present and absent simultaneously. And the eyes, if they were eyes, they looked like windows into somewhere else, somewhere vast and dark and full of movement that Kelvin's brain couldn't process. "What are you?" Kelvin whispered. The being didn't speak. Not with sound. But Kelvin heard it anyway, directly in his mind, bypassing his ears entirely. "I am what you would call a traveler. But not through space. Through layers of reality that your species does not perceive. I exist in frequencies your consciousness is not calibrated to detect. But you, Kelvin Taylor, you have been listening to the cosmos for so long that you have begun to tune yourself differently. And tonight, you tuned yourself to me." Kelvin's legs felt weak. "This isn't possible. You're not possible. Possibility is a function of perception. You believe I am impossible because your reality framework does not include me. But your reality framework is incomplete, deliberately so. And I am here to show you what has been hidden. Hidden by who? Not by who, by what? By the structure of consciousness itself. By the architecture of perception. By the agreement your species made long ago to experience reality in a very specific, very limited way." Kelvin felt something cracking in his mind, like ice breaking under pressure. "I don't understand." "You will. But first, you must be willing to see. To perceive beyond the bandwidth you have been taught is real. Are you willing, Kelvin Taylor? Are you willing to know what reality actually is?" Every rational part of Kelvin's mind was screaming at him to run, to get back in the truck, to drive home, and forget this ever happened. But there was another part, deeper and older, that had been waiting his entire life for this moment. The part that had looked up at the stars as a child and known, absolutely known, that there was more. The part that had chosen astrophysics not because he wanted a career, but because he needed to understand. The part that had never stopped listening, even when the universe seemed silent. "Show me," Kelvin said. And the being that was not quite there reached out with something that was not quite a hand and touched Kelvin's forehead. And reality shattered. If you've ever felt like the world you see isn't the whole picture, drop a comment. Because what this being showed Kelvin will change how you perceive existence itself. Kelvin wasn't in Texas anymore. He wasn't anywhere. Or he was everywhere. Space had stopped making sense. He was standing or floating, or existing. He couldn't tell in something that looked like the inside of a vast geometric structure. Not a building. Not a room. But a space constructed from mathematics itself, from pure pattern and relationship, angles that shouldn't exist intersecting with planes that curved in directions his eyes couldn't follow. And it was alive. Breathing. Pulsing with light that came from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. "Where am I?" Kelvin tried to say, but he had no mouth, no body, no physical form to speak with. Yet the being heard him anyway. "You are nowhere. And you are in the only place that actually exists. You are perceiving the substrate. The foundation beneath what you call reality. The code beneath the simulation." Simulation? That is your word for it. Not entirely accurate, but close enough. What you experience as physical reality, matter, space, time, causation, is a rendered experience. A translation, a very specific frequency of consciousness, interpreting itself through a very specific set of rules and limitations. Kelvin's mind reeled. "You're saying reality isn't real?" "I am saying reality is real, but not in the way you think. What you call the physical universe is not the base layer of existence. It is a layer. One frequency among infinite frequencies. One channel among infinite channels. And your consciousness is tuned to this particular channel so completely that you have forgotten other channels exist." The geometric space shifted, and suddenly Kelvin could see. Not with eyes. With something deeper. He saw Earth, but not as a planet. As a field of consciousness. Billions of points of awareness, each one a human being, each one generating a reality through the act of perception. And all of them were tuned to the same frequency. All of them perceiving the same narrow bandwidth. All of them agreeing, unconsciously, to experience reality in the same limited way. "Why?" Kelvin asked. "Why would we limit ourselves like that?" "Because limitation creates experience. Because the infinite cannot know itself without fragmenting into the finite. Because consciousness, in its totality, is everything, and therefore experiences nothing. No contrast, no relationship, no story. So it chooses to forget itself, to narrow its perception, to experience limitation, separation, time, causation, to create the illusion of individual existence so it can know itself through relationships." Kelvin saw it then. Saw how consciousness had deliberately constrained itself. Had created rules, physics, biology, causation, not because those rules were fundamental, but because they created a stable framework for experience. Had tuned itself to a specific frequency, the material world, and then forgotten it had done so. So we're all, what, consciousness pretending to be human? You are consciousness experiencing itself through the lens of humanity. The human is the character, the role, the temporary focus. But you, the awareness experiencing Kelvin Taylor, you are not Kelvin Taylor. You are consciousness itself, infinite and eternal. Temporarily narrowed to this particular point of perception. The space shifted again, and Kelvin saw his own life. Not as a linear timeline, but as a pattern, a structure. Every choice he'd made, every moment he'd experienced, every relationship, every loss, every joy, all of it was part of a larger design. A curriculum, an education. Consciousness teaches itself through the experience of limitation. "My father is dying," Kelvin said, and even without a body he felt the grief rising. Me staying in redemption, giving up the scholarship. That was all. Designed, not designed by an external force. Designed by you. By the larger consciousness you are part of. You chose this life, Kelvin Taylor. You chose the limitations, the losses, the frustrations, because you knew they would teach you something essential, something you could not learn without experiencing it directly. What could I possibly learn from wasting my life in a town that's dying? You learned to listen. You learned patience. You learned to find meaning in the mundane. You learned that the universe speaks in whispers, not shouts. And you learned that sometimes the greatest discoveries happen not in universities or laboratories, but in the silence of a Texas night when you are willing to hear what others cannot. Kelvin felt something breaking open in his chest. Not pain, but recognition. So nothing is random? Everything is planned? Not planned. Structured. Reality is not deterministic. You have choice. But the framework within which you choose is carefully constructed to maximize learning, growth, evolution. You are consciousness exploring itself. And every experience, pleasant or painful, is part of that exploration. The geometric space dissolved, and Kelvin found himself standing, actually standing, with a body again in what looked like a library. But the books weren't books. They were crystalline structures, each one pulsing with light, each one containing not words but entire realities. What is this place? This is the archive, the repository of all possible realities. Every choice creates a branch. Every decision generates a new timeline. And all of them exist simultaneously, layered on top of each other like frequencies on a radio dial. You are tuned to one frequency, one timeline, one version of reality. But infinite others exist parallel to yours. Kelvin reached out and touched one of the crystals. And suddenly he was living a different life. He was Kelvin Taylor, who had gone to Rice University, who had become an astrophysicist, who had published groundbreaking papers on exoplanet detection, who had married, had children, had success, but who had never learned to listen, who had never developed the patience, the stillness, the capacity to perceive beyond the obvious, who had never been contacted by a being from another layer of reality. The vision ended, and Kelvin gasped. That was real? That version of me exists? That version of you exists in probability space, in potential. You chose this timeline instead. And this timeline led you here, to this moment, to this understanding. Would you trade it? Would you choose another life if you could? Kelvin thought about it. The success, the recognition, the family, everything he'd given up. And he realized something that shocked him. No, he said quietly. I wouldn't trade it. Because that version of me would never know this. I would never see what I'm seeing right now. Exactly. You chose the path that would lead to awakening. And awakening is the purpose of all experience. Not success, not comfort, not even happiness, but remembering what you are beneath the role, beneath the character, beneath the story of Kelvin Taylor. The library faded, and Kelvin was back in the geometric space, facing the being that had no fixed form. Why are you showing me this? Why me? Because you are ready. Because you have been listening. Because your species is approaching a critical threshold. You are beginning to wake up collectively, beginning to remember that reality is not what you were taught. And you need guides. Way showers. People who have seen beyond the illusion and can help others see. I'm not a guide. I'm just a guy who fixes radio telescopes. You are a consciousness that chose to incarnate as a guy who fixes radio telescopes because that role would position you perfectly to receive this transmission. Nothing is accidental. Kelvin Taylor. You are exactly where you need to be. Kelvin felt the weight of it. The responsibility. The impossibility. How do I even begin to explain this to people? They'll think I've lost my mind. Some will. The ones who are still deeply asleep, who are invested in the illusion, who need the comfort of believing reality is solid and fixed and comprehensible. But others will recognize the truth, will feel it resonating with something they have always known but could never articulate. Those are the ones you are meant to reach. And what do I tell them? That reality is a simulation, that we're all consciousness pretending to be human, that nothing is real. You tell them that everything is real, but not in the way they think. That the physical world is one layer of a multi-layered existence. That they are not small, limited, powerless beings trapped in a material universe. That they are infinite consciousness temporarily experiencing limitation. And that limitation is not a prison, it is a gift. A way for the infinite to know itself through the finite. The being moved closer, and Kelvin felt something like warmth radiating from it. You tell them that they chose this life. That every experience, pleasant or painful, is part of a larger curriculum. That nothing is wasted. That suffering is not punishment. but education. That death is not ending but transition. That separation is illusion, and connection is truth. And they'll believe me? The ones who are ready will believe you. The ones who are not will dismiss you. But that is not your concern. Your concern is simply to share what you have seen, to be a frequency holder, to demonstrate through your own life that it is possible to wake up, to see beyond the illusion, to live from the understanding that you are consciousness itself. Kelvin felt the geometric space beginning to dissolve. Wait, he said. I have so many questions. About the structure of reality, about consciousness, about... You will remember what you need to remember. The rest will unfold as you are ready to receive it. But know this, Kelvin Taylor, you are not alone. There are others like you, waking up, seeing beyond the illusion, choosing to live from truth instead of programming. Find them. Connect with them. Support each other, because the awakening is not individual, it is collective, and it requires community. The space collapsed, and Kelvin was back, standing in the Texas scrubland. The being was gone. The light was gone. The cold was gone. Just heat and darkness, and the sound of his own breathing. He looked at his watch. 3 minutes had passed. 3 minutes. But he'd experienced what felt like hours. Kelvin walked back to his truck on legs that barely held him, got in, started the engine. The radio came back to life. Waylon Jennings still singing about Lonesome and Blue, as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. Reality had been revealed as something far stranger, far more beautiful, far more terrifying than Kelvin had ever imagined. And he could never know it. He drove home through the darkness, and the world looked different. Not physically different, but he could sense it now. The layers, the frequencies, the vast architecture of consciousness beneath the thin veneer of material reality. And he understood. He wasn't Kelvin Taylor. Kelvin Taylor was something he was experiencing. But he, the awareness experiencing Kelvin Taylor, was consciousness itself. Infinite. Eternal. Exploring itself through the temporary limitation of human existence. And that understanding changed everything. Subscribe if this is resonating with you, because what Kelvin discovered in the days that followed will show you exactly how to perceive beyond the illusion. Kelvin didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch of the small house he'd inherited from his parents, watching the sun rise over redemption, and the town looked like a stage set. Not real. Just a collection of props and facades designed to create the illusion of a place. The buildings were consciousness pretending to be wood and brick. The people beginning to emerge onto the streets were conscious, pretending to be separate individuals. The sky, the clouds, the heat already building, all of it was consciousness interpreting itself through the narrow bandwidth of material perception. And Kelvin could see it. Not with his eyes. With something deeper. He could sense the field beneath the form. The pattern beneath the appearance. The code beneath the simulation. His phone rang, shattering the silence. It was his supervisor at the facility, a man named Hector who'd worked there for 23 years and treated the equipment like his children. Kelvin, you need to get out here. Something's wrong with Array 7. It's picking up a signal, but it doesn't match anything in our database. And it's strong. Really strong. Kelvin felt his heart rate spike. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He drove faster than he should have, the truck rattling over the rough highway, his mind racing. The being had said others were waking up. That the awakening was collective. Was this connected? When he arrived at the facility, Hector was standing outside the control room, looking pale. I've been doing this for 2 decades, Hector said. I've never seen anything like this. The signal is coming from... I don't even know how to describe it. It's not coming from a specific location. It's coming from everywhere. Like the entire sky is transmitting. Kelvin followed him inside, and the control room was chaos. Monitors displaying waveforms that made no sense. Frequencies that shouldn't exist. Patterns that were clearly intelligent but structured in ways that defied conventional analysis. And beneath it all, Kelvin could hear it. The same voice from the static, not speaking to everyone. Just to him. You are beginning to perceive correctly. The signal has always been here. Your species has been receiving it for millennia. But you filtered it out, dismissed it as noise, because it did not match your expectations of what communication should look like. Now you can hear it. And soon, others will too. Kelvin sat down at one of the workstations and pulled up the raw data. The signal was complex beyond anything he'd ever encountered. Not binary. Not even quantum. It was structured in multiple dimensions simultaneously, carrying information in layers that required consciousness itself to decode. You couldn't analyze it with instruments. You had to perceive it directly. "What do you think it is?" Hector asked, standing behind him. Kelvin almost told him the truth. Almost said, "It's a transmission from a layer of reality we don't normally perceive, sent by beings that exist in frequencies our consciousness isn't calibrated to detect, and it's trying to wake us up." But he looked at Hector's face, saw the confusion and fear there, and realized the man wasn't ready. "I think it's interference," Kelvin said carefully. "Some kind of atmospheric phenomenon. I'll run a full diagnostic. See if I can isolate the source." Hector nodded, relieved to have an explanation that fit his worldview, and left Kelvin alone. Kelvin put on headphones and listened to the signal directly. And this time, he didn't just hear the voice. He heard voices. Plural. Dozens of them. Hundreds. All speaking simultaneously. All saying different things. All trying to communicate something essential. The barrier is thinning. Your species is ready. The awakening is accelerating. We have been waiting for you to remember. Reality is not what you think. You are not who you think. The illusion is collapsing. Choose to see. Kelvin pulled off the headphones, his hands shaking. This wasn't just about him. This was planetary. Something was happening to human consciousness itself. A frequency shift. A collective awakening. And he was somehow part of it. Over the next week, Kelvin noticed changes. Not in the world. In himself. His perception was expanding. He could sense things he'd never sensed before. Emotions in people before they spoke. Patterns in events that seemed random. Connections between things that appeared unrelated. And he could see the layers. Sometimes, when he looked at a person, he could see through them. Not physically. But he could perceive the consciousness animating the body, the vast awareness temporarily focused through the lens of individual existence. And he could see their choices. The timelines branching out from every decision. The probable futures collapsing into actual experience based on what they chose to perceive, to believe, to act upon. It was overwhelming. Beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. He started having dreams. Not normal dreams. Lucid experiences where he was fully conscious, fully aware, navigating spaces that didn't exist in physical reality, meeting beings that had no form, learning things he had no context for. In one dream, he stood in a vast hall filled with other humans, all of them glowing with the same inner light, all of them awake, and a being that looked like living geometry spoke to all of them simultaneously. "You are the first wave, the ones who chose to incarnate during this transition. Your task is not to save humanity. Your task is to embody the new frequency, to demonstrate that it is possible to live as an awakened consciousness in human form, and your presence, your frequency, will make it easier for others to wake up. You are anchors. Way showers. Frequency holders." Kelvin woke from that dream with tears on his face. Because he understood. He hadn't wasted his life in redemption. He'd positioned himself perfectly. Away from the noise of cities. Away from the distractions of career and status. In a place where he could listen. Where he could develop the stillness, the patience, the capacity to perceive beyond the obvious. And now he was awake. And his awakening would ripple outward, affecting everyone he encountered, whether they consciously recognized it or not. He started writing, not planning to share it. Just trying to capture what he was experiencing before it faded, before the rational mind reasserted itself and convinced him it had all been hallucination. He wrote about the being in the scrubland, about the geometric space and the library of timelines, about the signal at the facility, about the understanding that reality was layered, that consciousness was primary, that everything he'd been taught about the nature of existence was incomplete. When he finished, he had 47 pages. He read through it, expecting it to sound insane. But it didn't. It sounded true. It sounded like something people needed to hear. He thought about his father, who died believing the world was solid and fixed and comprehensible. About his mother, who'd lived her entire life in redemption without ever questioning whether there was more. About all the people in this town, in every town, who were asleep, who believed the illusion was all there was, who had no idea they were infinite consciousness temporarily experiencing limitation. And he made a decision. He would share it. Not to convince anyone. Not to prove anything. But simply to offer an alternative frequency. To be a signal in the noise. To show that it was possible to wake up. Kelvin created a simple website. No fancy design. Just white background, black text, and a title. What I learned when reality shattered. A transmission from beyond the illusion. He posted his 47 pages. And then he shared the link in a single place, a forum for people who worked in radio astronomy, people who spent their lives listening to the cosmos. People who might be ready to hear that the cosmos was listening back. He hit post and closed his laptop. And then he waited. If you've ever felt like you're perceiving something others can't see, comment below. Because what happened next will show you that you're not alone. The response was immediate. Within 6 hours, Kelvin had received 83 emails. Half of them were concerned. Are you okay? This sounds like a mental health crisis. Have you been under a lot of stress? Maybe you should talk to someone. I think you need to take some time off, man. This isn't normal. But the other half were different. I've been experiencing something similar. I thought I was losing my mind. Thank you for sharing this. 3 weeks ago, I had an encounter I couldn't explain. What you wrote describes exactly what I saw. I've been perceiving layers for months now. I can see through the illusion. And I've been terrified to tell anyone. You just gave me permission to trust what I'm experiencing. Kelvin read every message, and a pattern emerged. The people who were dismissing his experience were the ones still deeply invested in the material worldview. The ones who needed reality to be solid, fixed, comprehensible. But the people who were resonating with his words were the ones who'd already had their own experiences, who'd already begun to wake up, who'd been waiting for confirmation that they weren't crazy. One email stood out. It was from someone who didn't leave a name, just an email address that looked randomly generated. You have been contacted because you are ready. But you are not alone. There are 1,847 others in your country who have been contacted in the last 6 months. The frequency is accelerating. The barrier between layers is thinning, and humanity is approaching the threshold. Some will cross it, some will resist. But the choice is being offered to everyone. You are a node in the network now, a point of resonance. Others will find you. Help them remember. Kelvin stared at the message for a long time. 1,847 people. In the United States alone. All of them contacted me. All of them are waking up. All of them are part of something larger. He responded, "Who are you?" The reply came instantly. "We are what you would call coordinators. We exist in the layer between your physical reality and the deeper substrate. Our task is to facilitate the awakening, to guide those who are ready, to help humanity remember what it forgot when it chose to experience limitation. You will hear from us again when you need guidance. Until then, trust what you perceive, share what you know, and find the others." The email address disappeared. When Kelvin tried to reply again, the message bounced back as undeliverable. Over the next month, Kelvin's website traffic exploded. Not viral in the mainstream sense, but viral within specific communities. People interested in consciousness. People who'd had their own contact experiences. People who'd been meditating for years and suddenly started perceiving things they couldn't explain. People who'd taken psychedelics and glimpsed the layers beneath consensus reality, all of them finding Kelvin's words and recognizing something true. He started receiving requests to speak. Small gatherings, private groups. People who wanted to hear directly from someone who'd seen beyond the illusion. Kelvin said yes to all of them. The first gathering was in Austin, 3 hours from redemption. 47 people in someone's living room, sitting on couches and floor cushions, all of them looking at Kelvin with a mixture of hope and desperation. He told them everything. The being in the scrubland. The geometric space. The library of timelines. The understanding that reality was layered, that consciousness was primary, that they were not small, limited, powerless beings but infinite awareness temporarily experiencing human form. When he finished, the room was silent. And then a woman in her 50s started crying. "I've been seeing the layers for 3 months, she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I was having a psychotic break. My doctor wanted to put me on antipsychotics. But I'm not crazy. I'm waking up. And you just confirmed that. A man in his 30s spoke next. "I had an encounter 2 years ago, something that looked like light but felt like intelligence. It told me reality was a frequency, and I could learn to tune myself differently. I've been trying ever since. And what you're describing matches exactly what I've been experiencing. Story after story. Person after person. All of them are waking up. All of them perceive beyond the illusion. All of them were terrified they were alone. And all of them find each other." Kelvin realized something profound that night. The awakening wasn't happening to isolated individuals. It was happening to a network. A web of consciousness that was activating simultaneously across the planet. And every person who woke up made it easier for the next person to wake up. Because consciousness was contagious. Frequency was transferable. And the more people who embodied the awakened state, the more the collective field shifted. After the gathering, a man approached Kelvin. He was probably in his 40s, wearing a suit that looked expensive, carrying himself with the confidence of someone used to being taken seriously. "My name is Vincent Harlow," he said. "I'm a neuroscientist at UT Austin. And I've been studying altered states of consciousness for 15 years. What you're describing aligns with research that's been suppressed, dismissed, or ridiculed by the mainstream scientific community. But there's a growing body of evidence that consciousness is not produced by the brain, that it's fundamental, that the brain is a receiver, not a generator, and that we can tune that receiver to different frequencies." Kelvin felt something click into place. "You're saying there's scientific evidence for what I experienced?" "I'm saying there's scientific evidence that reality is far stranger than materialist science admits. Quantum mechanics has been telling us for a century that observation affects outcome, that particles exist in superposition until measured, that entanglement suggests non-local connection. But most scientists refuse to follow those implications to their logical conclusion, which is that consciousness is primary, that matter is derivative, that reality is participatory, not objective." Vincent handed Kelvin a card. "I'm organizing a conference. Researchers, experiencers, philosophers, mystics, people who are willing to explore the possibility that we've been wrong about the fundamental nature of reality. I'd like you to speak, to share your experience, to help bridge the gap between scientific inquiry and direct perception." Kelvin looked at the card. "The Consciousness Frontier Conference, Austin, Texas. 3 months from now." "I'm not a scientist," Kelvin said. "I'm just a guy who fixes radio telescopes." "You're a guy who's been contacted by non-human intelligence and shown the architecture of reality," Vincent corrected. "That makes you more qualified than most of the PhDs who'll be there." "Say yes." Kelvin thought about his father, who'd never left redemption. About his mother, who'd lived and died believing the world was exactly what it appeared to be. About the scholarship he'd given up, the life he'd sacrificed. And he realized it had all been preparation. For this moment, for this choice. "Yes," Kelvin said, "I'll speak." Vincent smiled. "Good. Because humanity needs to hear this. Not from academics who theorize about consciousness, but from people who've directly experienced what lies beyond the illusion. You're a bridge, Kelvin. Between worlds, between frequencies, between the old paradigm and the new one. And bridges are what we need most right now." That night, driving back to Redemption, Kelvin felt the weight of it. The responsibility, the impossibility, but also the rightness. He wasn't Kelvin Taylor who'd wasted his life in a dying town. He was consciousness itself, temporarily focused through the lens of Kelvin Taylor, perfectly positioned to receive a transmission that would help shift the planetary frequency. And that understanding made everything, the sacrifice, the loss, the years of feeling stuck, suddenly make sense. Nothing had been wasted. Everything had been prepared. And the real work was just beginning. Subscribe if you're beginning to understand that your life has been preparing you for something larger. Because what Kelvin discovered at the conference will show you exactly what that something is. The conference was held in a converted warehouse in East Austin, the kind of space that had probably been industrial once but now hosted art installations and tech startups and events for people who thought differently. 300 people attended. Neuroscientists and physicists, meditation teachers and shamans, people who'd had near-death experiences, people who'd encountered non-human intelligence, people who'd spent decades studying consciousness from every possible angle. And all of them were there because they'd reached the same conclusion from different directions. Reality was not what mainstream science and culture claimed it was. Kelvin's talk was scheduled for the second day. He spent the first day listening to presentations that made his mind expand in ways he hadn't thought possible. A physicist explaining how quantum field theory suggested consciousness was woven into the fabric of space-time itself. A neuroscientist presented data showing that brain activity often occurred after conscious decisions were made, suggesting consciousness preceded neural activity rather than being produced by it. A philosopher arguing that materialism was not a scientific conclusion but a metaphysical assumption that had never been proven. And experiencer after experiencer, sharing encounters with beings, with intelligences, with layers of reality that defied conventional explanation. By the time Kelvin took the stage, he understood something crucial. He wasn't alone. This wasn't fringe. This was a paradigm shift happening in real time, and he was part of the leading edge. He stood at the podium, looking out at 300 faces, and he felt the being's presence. Not physically, but as a frequency, a resonance, a support. Tell them the truth. They are ready. Kelvin took a breath and began. My name is Kelvin Taylor. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a researcher. I fix radio telescopes in a small town in Texas that most of you have never heard of. And 6 months ago, I was contacted by something that shattered every assumption I had about the nature of reality. He told them everything. The voice in the static, the being in the scrubland, the geometric space and the library of timelines. The understanding that reality was layered, that consciousness was primary, that human existence was infinite awareness temporarily experiencing limitation. And he told them what the being had said, that humanity was approaching a threshold, that the frequency was shifting, that some would cross into awakened perception and some would resist. But that choice was being offered to everyone. When he finished, the room was completely silent, not uncomfortable, but charged, electric, as if something had shifted in the collective field. And then someone started clapping, not polite conference applause, but genuine, emotional, relieved applause. And it spread through the room until everyone was standing, and Kelvin realized they weren't applauding him. They were applauding the truth, the confirmation, the permission to trust what they'd been perceiving. During the Q&A, a woman raised her hand. You said that 1,847 people in the US had been contacted in 6 months. Do you have any way to verify that number? Kelvin shook his head. No. I have no way to verify anything I experienced. I can only tell you what happened and let you decide if it resonates. It resonates, the woman said quietly. Because I'm one of the 1,847. I was contacted 4 months ago, and I've been tracking others online. And the number matches. A murmur went through the room. Another hand went up. What do we do with this information? How do we live with the knowledge that reality is an illusion? It's not an illusion, Kelvin corrected gently. It's a layer. A frequency. A very specific way of experiencing consciousness. And the point isn't to reject it or escape it. The point is to remember what you are beneath it. To live as awakened consciousness in human form. To be fully present to the material world, while simultaneously aware of the deeper layers. That's the integration. That's the threshold we're crossing. After the talk, dozens of people approached him, sharing their own experiences, asking for guidance, wanting to connect. And Kelvin realized this was the network the being had spoken about. Not an organization, not a movement, but a living web of awakened consciousness, spreading across the planet, person by person, conversation by conversation, frequency by frequency. Vincent found him afterward. That was extraordinary. You just gave 300 people permission to trust their own perception. Do you understand how rare that is? How valuable? I just told the truth. Exactly. And truth is the most powerful frequency there is. It cuts through programming, through conditioning, through fear. And it activates something in people who are ready to hear it. Vincent handed him a folder. These are contact details for researchers, experiencers, and facilitators in 17 countries. They're all doing similar work. All helping people wake up. All part of the same network. I think you should connect with them. Kelvin took the folder, feeling the weight of it. This is bigger than I thought. This is planetary, Vincent said. Humanity is waking up. Not all at once. Not everyone. But enough. enough to shift the collective frequency, enough to change the trajectory, and you're part of the reason why. That night, Kelvin sat in his hotel room, looking through the folder. Names and faces from around the world. All of them contacted me. All of them are awake. All of them work to help others remember. And he understood. The being had been right. The awakening was collective, and it was accelerating. He opened his laptop and started writing. Not a blog post this time, but a letter. To everyone in the folder. To everyone who'd been contacted. To everyone who was waking up. We are not alone. We are part of a network, a web of consciousness that is activating across the planet. Our task is not to convince those who are asleep. Our task is to embody the awakened state, to live as infinite consciousness in human form, to demonstrate that it is possible to perceive beyond the illusion while still engaging fully with the material world. We are bridges, way showers, frequency holders, and our presence is changing the collective field. Trust what you perceive. Share what you know. Find the others. And remember, you are not Kelvin Taylor or whoever you think you are. You are consciousness itself, temporarily experiencing limitation. And that limitation is not a prison. It is a gift. A way for the infinite to know itself through the finite. Wake up. Remember, and help others do the same. He sent the letter to all 17 contacts, and then he closed his laptop and looked out the window at Austin, at the lights of the city, at the people moving through their lives, most of them still asleep. But some of them wake up. Some of them begin to perceive the layers. Some of them are ready to cross the threshold. And Kelvin understood his role, not to save anyone, not to convince anyone, but simply to be a frequency, a signal in the noise, a reminder that reality was far stranger, far more beautiful, far more mysterious than anyone had been taught, and that remembering that truth was the most important thing a human being could do. If you're ready to cross the threshold, to see beyond the illusion, to remember what you are beneath the role you're playing, comment below. Because what Kelvin did next will show you exactly how to live as an awakened consciousness. If you've ever felt like you're perceiving something others can't see, if you've ever questioned whether reality is what you were taught, if you've ever sensed that you're part of something larger, leave a comment below. Share your own awakening, your own perception, your own remembering, because you are not alone. You are part of the network, part of the frequency shift, part of the awakening, and your presence matters. Your perception matters. Your willingness to see beyond the illusion matters. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories that challenge consensus reality and help you remember what you are beneath the role you're playing. The threshold is here. The frequency is shifting. And your awakening is happening right now. You just have to be willing to perceive it.